You want to know what pure satisfaction looks like? Picture this. My sister's husband, the man who spent years making snide comments about my little career, sitting at our family dinner table in complete stunned silence. His fork halfway to his mouth, eyes wide, as the words I just spoke sink in. My sister, who built her entire identity around being married to wealth, suddenly looking like she'd swallowed glass. The same people who used to pity me now, staring with newfound respect. That moment was 7 years in the making. 7 years of humiliation, condescension, and being treated like the family disappointment. But here's the thing about patient people, like me, we don't get mad. We get strategic. And when we strike back, it's devastating. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Growing up, everyone always said we were the perfect pair of sisters. Sarah was the pretty one, with the blonde curls and bright blue eyes that made strangers stop Mom in grocery stores to compliment her beautiful daughter. I was the smart one, always buried in books, winning spelling bees, and making honor roll every semester. On the surface, it seemed like we each had our own lane, our own special thing. But even as kids, I could see the resentment building in Sarah's eyes whenever someone praised my intelligence. When I won the science fair in 5th grade, she threw such a tantrum that Mom and Dad had to take her out for ice cream to calm her down. When I got accepted into the gifted program, she suddenly developed mysterious stomachaches that kept her home from school for a week. The thing is, Sarah was smart too. She just never wanted to put in the work. She'd rather charm her way through life, batting her eyelashes at teachers when she forgot assignments, or sweet-talking classmates into doing group projects for her. But intelligence? That was supposed to be my thing, and she hated sharing any spotlight. I remember one Christmas when I was 12 and Sarah was 14. Our aunt asked what we wanted to be when we grew up. I said I wanted to be a lawyer, or maybe go into business. Sarah rolled her eyes and said, "I'm going to marry someone rich so I won't have to work." Everyone laughed like it was cute, but I saw the calculation in her expression. Even then, she was planning to use her looks as her ticket to success. What bothered me most wasn't that she wanted an easy path through life. It was how she looked at me when people called me smart, like my intelligence was somehow taking something away from her. Like there wasn't room for both of us to succeed. That competitive edge only got sharper as we got older, and by the time we reached high school, every achievement I earned felt like a personal attack to her. I just didn't realize then how deep that resentment would run, or how cruel she'd become when she finally found her weapon of choice. Sarah met Brandon during her sophomore year at college, and from the moment she brought him home for Thanksgiving, I knew our family dynamic was about to change forever. Brandon came from old money, the kind of wealth that whispers instead of shouts, and Sarah latched onto him like she'd found her golden ticket. The way she introduced him wasn't as her boyfriend, but as Brandon, whose family owns half the commercial real estate in the city. Even our parents were impressed, suddenly treating Sarah like she'd accomplished something extraordinary by landing a rich guy. That weekend, everything shifted. Sarah started dropping casual comments about Brandon's family's vacation home in the Hamptons, their yacht, their connections. But it wasn't just bragging anymore, it was strategic positioning. When I mentioned getting a partial scholarship to finish my degree, she laughed and said, "How sweet that you have to work so hard for everything. Brandon and I never have to worry about things like student loans." The way she said it, with that condescending smile, made my stomach turn. Brandon didn't even correct her or seem uncomfortable with her attitude. If anything, he seemed amused by the power dynamic, like watching Sarah put me in my place was entertaining to him. During that same visit, I was explaining my internship at a local law firm, proud that I'd landed something competitive. Sarah interrupted me mid-sentence to show everyone photos from her and Brandon's weekend in Martha's Vineyard. "Isn't it wonderful not having to work during college?" she asked, looking directly at me. "Brandon says I should focus on more important things than career stuff." The family ate it up. Suddenly, my achievements felt small and desperate compared to Sarah's effortless lifestyle. This wasn't sibling rivalry anymore. This was Sarah discovering she had a weapon that could destroy me socially, emotionally, and financially. And Brandon? He was more than happy to be that weapon. He'd stand there with this smug smile while Sarah made her little digs, like he was proud to be the source of her superiority. That Thanksgiving was the beginning of 7 years of systematic humiliation, and I was too naive to see the storm coming. The years right after college were brutal for me, but pure bliss for Sarah. While I was working 60-hour weeks at an entry-level position that barely covered my studio apartment rent and student loan payments, Sarah was posting Instagram photos from European honeymoons and designer shopping sprees. Every family gathering became a carefully orchestrated performance designed to remind everyone exactly where we stood in the hierarchy. Sarah would arrive in whatever luxury car Brandon had bought her that month, dripping in jewelry that cost more than my annual salary. She'd make sure to casually mention their latest vacation, their new investment property, or the exclusive restaurant they'd tried, all while looking at me with this pitying expression. Christmas was the worst. I'd show up with thoughtful but modest gifts I'd saved for months to afford, and Sarah would arrive with shopping bags from Tiffany and Hermes. She'd give Mom a designer handbag worth more than I made in 3 months, then turn to me and say something like, "I'm sure your gift is lovely too, honey. It's so sweet how you make such an effort on your budget." The emphasis on your budget always stung. Brandon would sit there nodding along, adding his own little comments about how admirable it was that I was working so hard to make ends meet. He'd talk about their financial advisor, their stock portfolio, their real estate investments, all while I was clipping coupons and eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. The family ate it up. Mom would ooh and ah over Sarah's latest designer dress, and Dad would ask Brandon for investment advice, like he was some kind of financial guru instead of a guy who inherited everything. Meanwhile, when I mentioned working overtime or finally getting a small raise, they'd give me these patronizing smiles like I was a child proud of a participation trophy. Sarah perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "I love how you're still so passionate about your little job," she'd say. "It must be nice to feel like you're making a difference, even if it's not financially rewarding." Or my personal favorite, "Don't worry about money stuff. Some people are just meant for simpler lives." Every gathering left me feeling smaller, angrier, and more determined to prove them all wrong. The breaking point came at our cousin's wedding reception 3 years after Sarah married Brandon. I'd been saving for months to attend, scraping together money for a decent dress and a wedding gift, excited to celebrate family and maybe have one evening where everything wasn't about money. I should have known better. Sarah arrived looking like she'd stepped off a red carpet, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my car. She and Brandon had just returned from a month in Italy, and she couldn't stop talking about their private villa, their personal chef, the exclusive wineries they'd visited. I was standing with a group of relatives, actually having a nice conversation about my recent promotion to senior associate, when Sarah swept over with that predatory smile I'd learned to fear. "Oh, you got promoted again," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's so cute. What does that make you now? Like barely middle class?" The conversation stopped. People shifted uncomfortably, but Sarah wasn't done. "I was just telling Brandon how inspiring it is that you keep trying so hard. I mean, most people would have given up by now and found a nice man to take care of them, but you're still grinding away at that little firm." She paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the killing blow. "Brandon and I were actually talking about maybe helping you out financially. You know, like a family charity case. We could probably cover your rent for a few months if things get too desperate." The silence was deafening. My face burned with humiliation as relatives stared at their drinks, too uncomfortable to meet my eyes. Brandon stood behind Sarah with this amused smirk, clearly enjoying the show, but something happened in that moment that surprised even me. Instead of crying or arguing or storming off like I wanted to, I felt this cold, calculating calm wash over me. I looked at Sarah, then at Brandon, then back at Sarah, and I smiled. "That's really thoughtful of you," I said quietly. "But I think I'll be just fine." I excused myself and walked away, but inside something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was done being their entertainment, done being the family disappointment, done letting them define my worth. That night, I went home and made a plan. A real plan, and I swore to myself that the next time Sarah tried to humiliate me, she'd be in for the shock of her life. That wedding humiliation was my wake-up call, and I treated it like a declaration of war. The very next Monday, I started researching MBA programs, specifically the ones that would put me on a fast track to serious money and real power. I wasn't just going to catch up to Brandon's level anymore. I was going to surpass it, but I had to be smart about this. I couldn't let Sarah know what I was planning because she'd find some way to sabotage it or steal my thunder. So I kept my mouth shut and started living a double life. I enrolled in a part-time MBA program at the state university, taking evening and weekend classes while working my day job. That meant my schedule became absolutely brutal. I'd work 8 to 6 at the law firm, grab dinner from a vending machine, then drive straight to campus for classes until 10. Weekends were spent either in the library or working my second job at a high-end catering company, where I could network with wealthy clients while earning extra money for tuition. I picked up a third gig doing freelance paralegal work from home, staying up until 2 in the morning writing briefs and reviewing contracts. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My social life completely disappeared, but honestly, I didn't care. Every exhausted night was fuel for my revenge fantasy. While I was grinding through corporate finance homework at midnight, Sarah was posting photos from spa weekends and wine tastings. While I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for the third day in a row to save money, she was having champagne brunch at country clubs. The irony was perfect. She was so busy enjoying her pampered lifestyle that she never noticed I'd stopped showing up to family events. When I did appear, I'd make vague comments about being busy with work, and she'd roll her eyes like I was being dramatic about my little job. She had no idea I was quietly building an empire while she was shopping for designer handbags. Brandon remained equally clueless, too busy basking in his inherited wealth to notice that the family failure was systematically acquiring every skill and connection needed to destroy his smug superiority. They thought I was stuck in my lane forever. They had no idea I was about to change the entire game. As my workload intensified and I became less available for family functions, Sarah and Brandon started getting bolder with their comments. What had once been Sarah's solo performance became a tag team effort, with Brandon adding his own special brand of condescension to the mix. The few times I did show up for family dinners, looking exhausted from my triple schedule, Brandon would make these snide observations disguised as concern. "You know, all this running around you're doing isn't really sustainable," he'd say, cutting his expensive steak with surgical precision. "Most people go through a phase where they think they can change their circumstances through sheer willpower, but reality usually sets in eventually." Sarah would nod sagely, like he'd just shared profound wisdom. "Brandon's right. You're burning yourself out trying to be something you're not. There's nothing wrong with accepting your limitations." When I mentioned I was taking some business courses, Brandon actually laughed. "Business school? That's cute. I hope you're not going into too much debt for this little experiment. The return on investment for people in your position is pretty questionable." The worst part wasn't even their cruelty, it was watching my parents enable every word. Mom would make these helpless little sounds like she wanted to defend me but didn't know how, while Dad would just change the subject to something safer. They never once told Sarah and Brandon to back off, or suggested that maybe, just maybe, their behavior was inappropriate. Instead, they'd make excuses for them later. "Sarah just worries about you," Mom would say. "And Brandon comes from a different world. He doesn't always understand." But I knew better. Brandon understood perfectly. He enjoyed having someone to look down on, someone whose struggles made his inherited privilege feel earned. He'd gotten comfortable being the family success story, the golden boy who'd rescued Sarah from middle-class mediocrity. My attempts to better myself threatened that narrative, so he had to diminish them, frame them as a temporary delusion that would eventually fade. Sarah fed off his validation, getting meaner with every laugh she earned from him. They thought they were breaking me down, convincing me to accept my place at the bottom of their social hierarchy. They had no idea they were just motivating me to work harder, study longer, and plan more carefully for the day I'd flip their entire world upside down. After 2.5 years of sleeping 4 hours a night and living on coffee and determination, I finally walked across that stage with my MBA in hand. I'd graduated summa cum laude, landed a position at one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the city, and tripled my salary overnight. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I could pay my bills without stress, buy groceries without calculating every dollar, and maybe even take a weekend off without panic. I was naive enough to think my family might actually be proud of me. The announcement at Sunday dinner should have been a celebration. I'd worked harder than I'd ever worked for anything in my life, and I'd actually pulled it off. But the moment I mentioned my new job title, I watched Sarah's face shift into that familiar, condescending smile. "Oh, honey, that's so cute," she gushed, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a kindergartner who'd just tied her shoes. "Look at you, finally getting a real job. What are you now, like an entry-level consultant?" She said, "Entry-level," like it was a dirty word, emphasizing each syllable. Brandon leaned back in his chair with that smug expression I'd grown to hate. "Consulting, huh? That's a tough field. Very competitive. Most people wash out in the first year when they realize how demanding it can be." He paused, taking a sip of his wine. "Of course, it's different when you don't have to worry about making partner or building a client base. My family's firm has been established for 3 generations, so I've never had to deal with that kind of pressure." Sarah jumped back in with fake sympathy. "It must be so stressful starting over in your 30s. I mean, most people have their careers figured out by now, but better late than never, right?" She turned to Brandon with wide eyes. "Should we be worried about her? All this career stuff seems so overwhelming for someone who's never had to handle real responsibility before." I sat there listening to them dissect my achievement like it was a charity case, watching my parents nod along, like their analysis made perfect sense. But here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't trying to impress them anymore. I was just getting started. This cute little job was going to be my launching pad, and they were too arrogant to see the writing on the wall. The next 3 years were a masterclass in delayed gratification and sheer willpower. While other people my age were starting families or taking weekend trips, I was building something bigger. 60-hour work weeks became my normal, and I spent every spare moment either studying for professional certifications or attending networking events where I could shake hands with the kind of people who made decisions that mattered. I became a ghost to my social circle, declining every invitation, missing every birthday party, because I had a goal that was bigger than temporary fun. The contrast with Sarah's life was almost comical. My Instagram feed, if I'd had time to post anything, would have been photos of spreadsheets and conference rooms. Hers was a constant stream of luxury vacations, wine tastings, and spa days. While I was working through another Saturday afternoon, she'd post pictures from some exclusive resort in the Caribbean, captioned with things like, "Life is too short not to enjoy every moment." The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought she was living while I was just surviving, but I knew better. There were moments when the doubt crept in, usually around 2 in the morning when I was still at the office, preparing for a client presentation while my body screamed for sleep. I'd wonder if Sarah was right, if I was just torturing myself for some impossible dream that would never pay off. That's when Diana saved my sanity. She was a senior partner at a competing firm who I'd met at a professional conference, and somehow she saw something in me that I couldn't always see in myself. Diana became my unofficial mentor, and the closest thing I had to a friend during those brutal years. She'd check in on me when I looked particularly exhausted, remind me that every sacrifice was building towards something meaningful, and share stories about her own climb to the top when being a woman in business was even harder than it was now. "They're going to underestimate you until the very last second," she told me over coffee one evening when I was particularly discouraged. "And that's your secret weapon. Let them think you're just playing dress-up in the business world. When you finally strike, they won't know what hit them." Diana understood what I was really building toward, even when I couldn't articulate it myself. The promotion to senior manager came with a corner office, a team of 12 analysts, and a salary that finally put me in 6-figure territory. After years of grinding, I was starting to see real results, and for the first time since this journey began, I felt like I could actually win this war. I decided to share the news at Mom's birthday dinner, thinking maybe this time would be different. Maybe this achievement was big enough that even Sarah would have to acknowledge I'd accomplished something real. I should have known better. The moment I mentioned the promotion, Sarah's eyebrows shot up with that same condescending surprise she'd been perfecting for years. "Oh wow, a manager," she said, clapping her hands together like I'd just learned to ride a bike. "That's so exciting for you. What's that, like middle management?" She turned to Brandon with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Honey, didn't you start in middle management right out of college?" "Before your father put you on the board, I mean." Brandon nodded thoughtfully, as if he was seriously considering my career trajectory. Management is definitely a step up. Good for you for sticking with it this long. Most people would have moved on to something more stable by now. But Sarah wasn't finished. She leaned forward with that fake concerned expression I'd learned to dread. I mean, it's nice that you're finally making decent money, but it's not real wealth like we have, you know. You're still basically trading hours for dollars, still dependent on someone else's business decisions. Brandon and I have generational wealth, investment portfolios, property that appreciates while we sleep. She paused to let that sink in, then delivered her knockout punch. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of you for working so hard, but there's a difference between having a good job and actually being financially secure. You're still just one layoff away from being back where you started. The table went quiet. My parents looked uncomfortable but said nothing, as usual. Brandon nodded along like Sarah had just explained basic economics to a child. I smiled and thanked them for their concern, but inside I was calculating. They thought I was climbing toward their level, trying to join their little club of comfortable superiority. They had no idea I was aiming so much higher than that. They had no idea that in 18 months I'd be making decisions that would affect people like Brandon, not working for them. With my management position secured, I started playing a much more sophisticated game. I wasn't just working hard anymore. I was working strategically, building relationships with the kind of people who could open doors that most people didn't even know existed. I started accepting speaking engagements at industry conferences, writing articles for business journals, and serving on non-profit boards where I could rub shoulders with CEOs and venture capitalists. Every connection was deliberate. Every conversation was an investment in my future reputation. I took calculated risks that other consultants wouldn't touch, volunteering for the impossible projects that could either make or break careers. When a major pharmaceutical company needed someone to lead a hostile acquisition analysis, I raised my hand. When a tech startup needed a turnaround strategy that everyone else said was hopeless, I took the case. I wasn't just trying to succeed anymore, I was trying to become indispensable, the person other powerful people called when they had problems that required real expertise. The beautiful thing was how completely oblivious Sarah remained to what I was actually building. She'd see me at family functions looking tired and assume I was still just grinding away at my little consulting job. When I mentioned traveling for work, she'd make jokes about how exhausting it must be to fly coach to boring business meetings. She had no idea I was flying first class to boardrooms where multi-million-dollar decisions were being made, or that I was building a network of contacts who controlled more wealth than Brandon's family had ever dreamed of. At Easter dinner, she actually asked if I was still doing that consulting thing, like it was a hobby I might outgrow. When I confirmed I was, she sighed dramatically and said, "Well, at least you're keeping busy." Some people just need to stay occupied, I guess. Brandon added his usual wisdom about how some people are just built for that kind of work, while he adjusted his expensive watch. They thought they were watching me struggle toward respectability, while they maintained their position at the top of the food chain. They had no clue that I was methodically building something that would make their inherited wealth look like pocket change. The opportunity I'd been preparing for was almost here, and they were going to learn the hard way that underestimating patient people is a very dangerous game. When Diana called me on a Tuesday morning in March and told me about the opening, I knew this was it. Chief Strategy Officer at Morrison Financial Group, one of the most prestigious investment firms on the East Coast. The kind of position that came with a 7-figure salary, equity stakes, and the power to make decisions that would affect Fortune 500 companies. The kind of job that would put me in the same rooms as senators, tech moguls, and the people who actually controlled the economy. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a complete transformation of everything I represented. The application process was brutal. 5 rounds of interviews with different boards, a comprehensive presentation to their executive committee, background checks that went back to my college professors, and a final evaluation that lasted 6 hours and covered everything from my strategic thinking to my crisis management skills. I had to fly to New York 4 different times, taking vacation days and making excuses about family emergencies to avoid questions from my current firm. The entire process took 3 months, and I couldn't tell a single person what I was going through. Meanwhile, Sarah was completely absorbed in planning what she called their biggest vacation yet, to celebrate Brandon's birthday. She'd call me randomly to complain about how hard it was to choose between the private villa in Tuscany or the yacht charter in the Greek islands. It's so stressful having too many amazing options, she'd sigh dramatically. Brandon says we should just do both, but then we'd miss the art auction in Monaco. She'd go on for 20 minutes about private chefs and helicopter transfers while I was sitting in airport lounges between interview flights, reviewing financial projections and merger strategies. The irony was perfect. She thought the most important decision in our family was which luxury vacation to choose, while I was quietly interviewing for a position that would make Brandon's entire career look like an entry-level job. When I finally got the call that I'd been selected, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my current office. I hung up the phone and sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing and realizing that everything was about to change. Sarah had no idea that her 7 years of condescension were about to come crashing down around her. The family failure was about to become the family success story, and the best part was going to be watching their faces when they realized it. Getting that call changed everything, but I knew I had to be smart about how I played this hand. The position wouldn't officially start for another month, which gave me time to plan the perfect moment for my reveal. This wasn't just about sharing good news anymore. This was about delivering maximum impact. I wanted Sarah and Brandon to understand exactly how wrong they'd been about me, and that required careful timing and the right audience. So I kept my mouth shut and started planning their downfall. The universe seemed to be cooperating with my revenge fantasy because 2 weeks after I got the job, Sarah called me with her latest announcement. She was practically breathless with excitement about their newest purchase, a second home in the Hamptons. Not just any house, mind you, but what she described as a compound with 8 bedrooms, a private beach, and enough space to host proper parties for Brandon's business associates. She couldn't wait to tell me every expensive detail, from the custom kitchen that cost more than most people's houses to the infinity pool that overlooked the ocean. But here's where Sarah really showed her true colors. After 20 minutes of describing their new paradise, she suddenly got all concerned and sisterly. "You know, I've been thinking about you working so hard at that little job of yours," she said with fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "Maybe you should consider a career change, something less demanding." Brandon was saying how consulting is really a young person's game, and you're not getting any younger. The audacity was breathtaking. Here she was, announcing a multi-million-dollar real estate purchase, while simultaneously suggesting I was too old and unsuccessful to handle my current career. "I just worry that you're setting yourself up for disappointment," she continued. "Some people aren't meant for high-pressure careers, and there's no shame in accepting that. Maybe something in administration or teaching. Something more suitable for your personality and, your financial reality." I made appropriate listening sounds while mentally calculating exactly how much my new salary would dwarf Brandon's trust fund income. In 4 weeks, I'd be making more money than their Hampton house cost, but she had no idea. The perfect moment was coming, and Sarah was walking right into my trap. Mom's birthday dinner was going to be the perfect stage for my revelation. The whole family would be there, including my aunt and uncle who'd witnessed that humiliating wedding reception years ago. I spent the week leading up to it in this strange state of nervous excitement, like I was preparing for the performance of my lifetime. I'd rehearsed different ways to casually drop the news, practice staying calm while delivering the information that would completely reshape how everyone saw me. I even bought a new dress, something that looked professional but understated, because I wanted my words to do the talking, not my outfit. The morning of the dinner, Sarah called me 3 times to share updates about Brandon's latest triumph. His family's investment firm had just closed some major deal that she clearly didn't understand but loved talking about anyway. "Brandon says it's the biggest acquisition his firm has ever handled," she gushed over the phone while I was getting ready. "The client specifically requested him because of his reputation in the industry. Can you imagine being that successful at such a young age?" She went on to explain how this deal was going to position Brandon for a promotion to senior partner, how they were already talking about upgrading to an even bigger house, how impressed everyone was with his business acumen. "I'm just so proud to be married to someone so accomplished," she sighed dreamily. "Some women marry for love, but I married for love and success. I'm so lucky." I made the appropriate congratulatory sounds while checking my reflection one last time. In about 3 hours, Sarah's definition of success was going to get completely redefined. When I arrived at Mom's house, Sarah was already holding court in the living room, regaling everyone with the same story about Brandon's business genius. She was wearing what looked like a $5,000 dress, and enough jewelry to buy a car, clearly determined to remind everyone of her elevated status before dinner even started. "Oh, good, you're here," she called out when she saw me. "I was just telling everyone about Brandon's latest success. Wait until you hear about this deal he just closed. It's absolutely incredible." I settled into a chair and smiled, my heart pounding with anticipation. "I can't wait to hear all about it," I said, and I meant every word. Dinner started exactly as I'd expected, with Sarah orchestrating a symphony of subtle humiliation disguised as family conversation. She'd positioned herself strategically across from me, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light every time she gestured, which was constantly. The moment we sat down, she launched into a detailed description of their Hampton House renovations, complete with name-dropping the celebrity architect they'd hired and the exclusive interior designer who usually only works with A-list clients. Brandon nodded along like a supportive husband, but I could see him calculating the impact of every word, making sure everyone understood the scope of their wealth and influence. "The wine cellar alone cost more than most people make in a year," Sarah said, touching her necklace absently. "But Brandon says if you're going to invest in real estate, you might as well do it right." She turned to me with that practiced, concerned expression. "Speaking of investments, how's your little retirement fund coming along? I know consulting doesn't usually come with the best benefits packages." Before I could answer, Brandon jumped in with his signature brand of condescending wisdom. "Actually, that's something people in your position really need to think about seriously," he said, cutting his steak with deliberate precision. "Real wealth isn't about salary. It's about generational assets, investment portfolios that work for you instead of you working for them." He paused to let that profound insight settle over the table. Sarah and I were just discussing our 5-year plan. Property acquisitions, international investments, maybe starting our own family foundation. The kind of financial planning that creates lasting impact. Sarah beamed at him like he'd just solved world hunger. "That's what I love about Brandon. He thinks so strategically about money. Not just earning it, but making it multiply." She glanced at me with fake sympathy. "It must be exhausting always having to trade hours for dollars. I can't imagine still having to prove my worth to some boss at my age." The rest of the family listened with rapt attention, asking Brandon for investment advice and praising Sarah's good choices in life. I sat there smiling, cutting my food slowly, savoring every condescending word because I knew they were about to eat them all. As the wine flowed and Sarah's confidence grew, her performance became increasingly theatrical and cruel. She started telling stories that were obviously designed to highlight the gap between our lifestyles, each one more pointed than the last. She described their recent charity gala where they'd bid $20,000 on a vacation package just for fun, then looked directly at me and said, "I know that probably sounds frivolous to someone who has to budget for everything, but when you have real money, giving back becomes so important." The emphasis on real money was like a slap across the face, but I just smiled and nodded. Brandon was getting more comfortable too, clearly enjoying his role as the family's financial guru. He started explaining their investment strategy to my dad, using terms he obviously thought would impress everyone. "The key is diversification across multiple asset classes," he said pompously. "Real estate, blue-chip stocks, some alternative investments. The kind of portfolio management that requires serious capital to make meaningful returns." Sarah jumped in with breathless admiration. "Brandon handles all our money stuff because I honestly can't even keep track of how much we have anymore. It's such a good problem to have." She turned to our cousin with exaggerated concern. "I worry sometimes that we're getting too comfortable with luxury. Like, should I feel guilty about having 3 vacation homes when some people struggle to afford rent?" The question was clearly directed at me, and everyone at the table knew it. I took a sip of wine and waited. Sarah was building towards something bigger. I could feel it. She had that gleam in her eye that meant she was preparing for her grand finale, the moment where she'd deliver some crushing blow about my limitations or failures. But the longer she talked, the deeper she dug her own grave. Every word about their wealth, every casual mention of their investments, every condescending comment about people like me, was just making my upcoming revelation more devastating. I checked my watch and realized we were getting close to dessert, which meant it was almost time. Sarah had no idea she was about to learn the difference between inherited comfort and real power, but she was about to get a masterclass in both. The opening came from the most unexpected source. My Uncle Jim, who'd been quietly listening to Sarah and Brandon's financial lectures all evening, turned to me during a lull in conversation and asked, "So what's going on with your work these days? You've been pretty quiet about your job lately." I felt my heart skip, but I kept my voice perfectly casual. "Oh, things have been interesting. I actually just accepted a new position." Sarah perked up immediately, probably expecting another cute little promotion she could dismiss. "Oh, really? What kind of position?" The entire table turned to look at me, and I realized this was it, the moment I'd been planning for years. I took a small sip of wine and set down my glass carefully. Chief Strategy Officer at Morrison Financial Group. The silence was immediate and absolute. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Brandon's face went completely white. Sarah's expression froze in that condescending smile, but her eyes went wide with shock. My dad was the first to break the silence. "Morrison Financial. Isn't that one of the biggest investment firms in the country?" I nodded calmly. "They handle portfolios for Fortune 500 companies, sovereign wealth funds, that sort of thing. It's been quite an opportunity." Brandon's fork clattered against his plate. I could see him doing rapid mental calculations, trying to process what this meant. Morrison Financial wasn't just bigger than his family's firm. It was the kind of company that his family's firm would dream of having as a client. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The woman who'd spent the entire evening explaining the difference between real wealth and my little salary had just realized that her sister now controlled more money in a single day than she and Brandon would see in their entire lives. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on anyone at the table. The family failure had just revealed herself to be the family powerhouse, and the golden couple was sitting there speechless, trying to figure out how their world had just flipped completely upside down. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I watched Brandon's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then pure panic as the full implications hit him. Morrison Financial wasn't just another investment firm. It was the kind of institution that people in his position aspired to work with, not compete against. His family's prestigious firm suddenly looked like a small-town operation compared to where I was headed. Sarah was completely frozen, her mouth still hanging open from whatever condescending comment she'd been about to make. The woman who'd spent years perfecting the art of making me feel small was sitting there looking like someone had just told her the laws of physics had been reversed. Her entire identity was built on being the successful sister, the one who'd married well and never had to worry about money. In the span of 30 seconds, that foundation had cracked completely. My aunt was the first to find her voice. "Morrison Financial? Oh my God, honey, that's incredible." The rest of the family started to come alive, asking questions, offering congratulations, and I watched Sarah shrink smaller with every word of praise directed my way. Uncle Jim was practically beaming. "I read about them in the Wall Street Journal all the time. Don't they manage like billions of dollars?" I nodded modestly. "The portfolio is substantial, yes." Brandon finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse. "When do you start?" There was something almost desperate in the question, like he was hoping this was all some elaborate joke or misunderstanding. "Monday," I said simply. Sarah made a small choking sound. Mom was crying happy tears. Dad was shaking his head in amazement, and my cousin was already pulling out her phone to Google my new company. The table that had been focused on Sarah and Brandon's wealth and wisdom 5 minutes ago was now completely absorbed in my achievement. I sat there calmly finishing my dinner while Sarah's world of superiority crumbled around her, piece by piece. The family failure had just become the family's biggest success story, and there was absolutely nothing she could say to diminish it. Sarah recovered first, desperately scrambling to regain control of the narrative. "Well, that's wonderful, honey," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I mean, it's probably a lot of pressure, right? These big corporate jobs, they burn people out so quickly. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility?" Her attempt at concern was transparent and pathetic, but I could see her trying to plant seeds of doubt, trying to frame my success as potentially overwhelming or temporary. Brandon jumped in with stammered questions that revealed just how rattled he was. How does the compensation structure work at a place like that? Is it mostly salary-based, or do they do performance bonuses? He was fishing for information that might somehow diminish what I'd accomplished. hoping to find some angle that would preserve his sense of superiority. I looked at him calmly and said, "The base salary is 7 figures, plus equity stakes and performance bonuses that typically double that." Brandon went even paler. Sarah made another choking sound. My parents were staring at me like I'd just revealed I was secretly a superhero, which honestly wasn't far from how I felt. The family that had watched Sarah and Brandon condescend to me for years was suddenly seeing me in an entirely different light. But Sarah wasn't done trying to salvage this. "I just worry that you're getting in over your head," she said, her voice getting higher and more desperate. "I mean, these Wall Street types can be really cutthroat. What if they're just using you and then they'll replace you with someone more experienced?" The irony was beautiful. Sarah, who hadn't worked a day in her adult life, was trying to explain the business world to someone who'd just landed one of the most coveted positions in finance. I smiled at her with genuine warmth. "I appreciate your concerns, Sarah, but they didn't hire me for my potential. They hired me because I've already proven I can handle billion-dollar portfolios and complex merger strategies. This position is actually a recognition of work I've already accomplished." The weight of that statement settled over the table like a blanket. 7 years of their condescension, 7 years of treating me like I was playing dress-up in the business world, and I'd been quietly building expertise they couldn't even comprehend. 3 months into my new position, and the family dynamics have shifted so completely that it's almost surreal. Sarah calls me now, actually calls me, asking for advice about investments and career decisions. The woman who spent 7 years telling me I wasn't built for success now wants to know if I think she should go back to school or start her own business. Brandon has become almost deferential, asking thoughtful questions about market trends and nodding seriously when I explain complex financial strategies. The condescension has been replaced by something that looks suspiciously like respect, maybe even a little fear. But here's what I've learned about revenge. The sweetest part isn't watching them scramble to adjust their attitudes toward me. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing I didn't just beat them at their game, I changed the entire game. They thought wealth was about inheritance and marriage and lucky connections. I proved that real power comes from competence, strategy, and the willingness to outwork everyone around you. Every morning when I walk into my corner office overlooking the city, I think about that wedding reception where Sarah tried to turn me into the family charity case. I think about all those dinners where she made me feel small and desperate and less than. And then I smile, because none of that pain was wasted. Every humiliation was fuel, every condescending comment was motivation, every moment they made me feel invisible was just preparation for the day I'd become impossible to ignore. Success really is the best revenge, but not for the reasons people think. It's not about proving other people wrong or making them feel bad. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than anyone believed, including yourself sometimes. It's about transforming pain into power and using other people's limitations as inspiration for your own limitless potential. Sarah learned that underestimating patient people is dangerous. Brandon learned that inherited privilege doesn't make you untouchable. And I learned that the girl who was always called just the smart one could become the woman who redefines what success looks like. These days, when people ask what it's like to be me, I don't talk about feelings or experiences. I talk about what's observable. I work hard. I deliver results. And I've built something that can't be taken away or diminished by anyone else's opinion. That's not revenge anymore. That's just power.